Good morning from Indianapolis. Good morning for me. It might be afternoon or evening for you, but for me, it's just finishing morning and good afternoon. I'm glad that you're here for another Live with Kevin, as we're here most Mondays and some other days. We'll be back on Wednesday again, Wednesday at 11 a.m., hour earlier, to do another show, our final show for the year. But I'm so glad that you're here, as we're going to talk about this fabulous new book, and you're going to get to meet a fabulous expert in a minute. But before we do all that, because you're here, I hope that you will interact with me and with us and with each other. So go into the comments of whatever social platform you're in and say hello. Tell us where you're located. We would love that if you did that, because, if we were around a physical, actual table, in proximity to each other. If you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had a comment, you'd share it. And if you had an idea, you would offer it. So why wouldn't you do that in this virtual setting as well? So the best way to start is by you to type in and get used to typing in your comments and say hello and tell us where you're from. And then as we go, if you have a comment, a question, please share it. Because when you do that, it'll make for a better conversation. You'll get your questions answered. And oh, by the way, it'll eventually make for a better podcast as well. If you don't notice, up over my shoulder, you see that it says Remarkable Leadership Podcast, which means this will be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where you can learn more about that at remarkablepodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a break here where we're going to do the snip to start the actual podcast that'll come out in a couple of months. So Marisa, this is for you. Marisa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. Blind spots. They're easy to see in others, but how do we see our own? And that's what we're talking about today. You will get some clues, some insights, and some steps that you can take now if you're willing to look. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm glad you're here. You could have been with us live. Well, for future episodes, you could be with us live. Hope that you will do that. The way to do that, though, is to join one of our online groups so you know when they're coming and where they'll be. So you can join us on Facebook or LinkedIn. Go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to join the groups there, where we announce when the live streams will be happening, so you can join us in the future and get this information, valuable information, sooner. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Masterclasses. Pick from 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become more effective, productive, and confident while overcoming some of a leader's toughest challenges. Learn more and sign up at remarkablemasterclass.com. And with that, I'm going to bring in my guest. Marisa Murray has joined us, and if you're with us live, you can now see her. Let me tell you a little bit about Marisa, and we'll get started. Marisa Murray is a leadership development expert and the CEO of Leaderly International, an organization dedicated to helping executives become better leaders in today's rapidly changing, highly complex world. She leverages her over 2 decades of executive experience as a former partner with Accenture, as a VP at Bell Canada, in providing executive coaching, leadership development services for organizations including Molson Coors, Pratt & Whitney, and Queen's University. She's the co-author of the USA Today bestseller, The Younger Self Letters: How Successful Leaders and Entrepreneurs Turned Trials into Triumph and How to Use Them to Your Advantage. She's also the author of 3 other books herself, including her latest, Blind Spots: How Great Leaders Uncover Problems and Unleash Performance. And that's what we're going to largely talk about today. Marisa, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's such a pleasure to be here.
It is my pleasure. And so we got the chance to chat for the last 10 minutes or so. I got to know you a little bit from reading your book, but others don't really know much about you except what they see right this minute. So I think even though I've given a bit of your bio, I'm curious. I like to ask people this. Tell us about your journey. Like when you were 10 or 8, you didn't think you'd be doing what you're doing now. Just kind of give us a little bit about the way you end up where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just had to think of what I wanted to be when I was 10, and I'm pretty sure it was a veterinarian because I love,
Veterinarian,
love, love.
doctor, astronaut, fireman.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, maybe there was insight in that in terms of my desire to help others. My desire to help at that time would have been my cat and my dog and any other bird I tried to rescue. And actually, I have really a train wreck of experiences of trying to rescue animals. So, so perhaps that was foreshadowing of that journey. But yeah, no. So I mean, I fell in love with the sciences during high school. I was very analytical. I loved math. I loved chemistry. I loved physics. I think I really loved these things because they always there were right answers and wrong answers. Mastery was straightforward. And that led me to do my engineering degree and to take on roles as an engineer before I did my MBA. And then as I joined Accenture, Anderson Consulting when I joined it, but I joined Accenture, I worked with a large number of manufacturers, utilities, industrial kind of organizations. And I ended up spending a lot of time supporting clients in aerospace and defense. So very technical. And I like to sort of just live in that world of black and white. And then over time, as you grow in these careers, you realize that like as much as the right answer or wrong answer theoretically matters, it's all about people, right? Your journey in terms of being able to drive outcomes is all about people, followership, leadership, engagement, influence. And so I kind of found myself pivoting around what I spent my time thinking about. And it was kind of interesting because when I look back, it's like I really didn't want to I didn't really want to specialize in this. I want to specialize in things that there's more clarity around. There's the part of me that doesn't like the art associated with the leadership. But the more I advanced, I wanted to figure it out because I knew how important it was. And I also knew how much I struggled with it myself. And I think a lot of leaders struggle with it. I mean, I just think that it's not straightforward. So long story short, I had some executive coaches during my tenure when I was up for partner, when I made partner, a different thing. And I always thought they had really cool jobs, but I didn't really understand the mechanisms that they were bringing to me. And I sometimes misunderstood them in terms of what or questioned them. So that made me curious enough to want to do my executive coaching certification. And when I did that, this world opened up to me. I just was like, oh, this is what they were trying to bring to me. And I was like, but I was in my own way. I was so in my own way at so many different points. And so then I just sort of started to want to just bring this to my people, to my kind of people, my technical, skeptical audiences. And so that's where I started. So 9 years ago, I founded Leaderly. And ever since then, I've just been trying to learn and master and articulate and teach and accompany people on their journey to their best leader.
Perfect. And so part of that journey leads you to recognize in working with other leaders that all of us, not just as leaders, but as human beings, have blind spots. We've
Absolutely.
got blind spots. And so all of us sort of know that phrase, but since you wrote the book with that title, tell us what you mean by that. Define blind spots for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I define blind spots very specifically as the gap between our intention and our impact. The gap.
So what does that mean? See, look at me. I've already got it up there. Like what?
Yes. That's
what does
fantastic.
that mean?
What that means is typically we are all very focused on our intention. So we have an intention to drive an outcome. We have an intention to develop our people. We have an intention, and we are blinded by that intention. That is all our brain is focused on, is our intention. And then we take action in the world. And we take these actions in the world, some perfect, some imperfectly, and that has an impact in the world. And oftentimes there's a gap between the impact that we had and our original intention. And
that's not what I meant. Like, that's not what I'm like.
Exactly.
Here's what I meant.
Exactly. Like you hear people all the time say, I did not say that. And like literally you play back the video. I mean, the good news is a lot of meetings were recorded during the pandemic. So you could literally go back and you're like, okay, I said that, but I didn't mean it, and like it's
I mean, you're in Canada, so there's some commercials in the US right now where they're doing that. Like, do you want to play the replay? And then they go back, I didn't say that. Well, yeah, I guess.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's not that people are lying. It's because their brain just understands that they had an intention, and then they hear what gets played back to them, and they hear the impact, and they say, well, that can't be what I said because that was not my intention, right? And so and it's like, well, it is what you said, and it had this impact on me, which is causing me to not, be able to collaborate with you in the way that is optimal for our collective performance, right? So there's a myriad of these different things. And so what I say is that the intention, the blind spots live in that gap between intention and impact. And
everybody, she's trying to do it with her hands. She's an engineer. She has a graph.
I have a graph.
She's trying to do it with her hands for those of you that are only listening.
Exactly.
She's trying
There's
to build
a gap,
the graph with her. She needs 3 lines. She's only got 2 hands. So, but the gap is this between what we intend and how it shows up in the world. Absolutely. Is the blind spot, and we can't see it. Is your point?
Absolutely. It's really interesting if you think about it. We are blind to our impact, and others are blind to our intention. So it's the combination.
Oh, by the way, we judge ourselves based on our intentions, but other people judge us based on what they actually saw.
Exactly.
Which are two different things.
Exactly. And so that's why this idea of demystifying, like this idea of being like, oh, I have blind spots or I don't have blind spots, like that's impossible. We all have blind spots. And not only that, it helps the other way around too. When we start to understand that the other person, that we are blind to their intention, then we can see that we are interpreting the impact that they're having on us in a pretty crude way, rather than considering potentially, what was intended.
We are literally, everybody, the blind leading the blind.
Leading the blind.
That is true. So, but the other way to look at this idea of, the fact that we all have blind spots as humans is that all of the research on self-awareness says that most people think they're very highly self-aware, and we're not good at it. I mean, it's another way of saying exactly what you're saying. Like there's all this stuff that's going on around us that we're not aware of, we're blind to. So in the book, you basically outline 7 types of blind spots, and we don't have time to talk about them all in depth, obviously. But for everyone, if you just joined us, we are talking with Marisa Murray, the author of this book, Blind Spots, How Great Leaders Uncover Problems and Unleash Performance. And so, Marisa, what I thought we'd do is just have you sort of walk through the 7, and then I think we'll talk about just a couple, but just give us each of, and for those watching, I'll put them on the screen, but just tell us about each of the 7 and just like 1 or 2 sentences. What do you mean by this type of blind spot?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the first one is false assumptions. And false assumptions, we all know that we run assumptions in our mind. And false assumptions are the category of blind spots where we're acting as if something is true and we have not validated that assumption. And that category, that probably could encompass, all the other 6.
In a way, it's sort of the overarching one of the rest.
It's the overarching one. But I think that the idea of really thinking about what assumptions am I running with on a regular basis, and asking people and validating, like that's why it's a nice one to sort of start with, to just think about what assumptions might I be running. And an example might be, and it's usually, the one thing that I want to say about all of them is they're typically the shadow side of our strength. So one of the examples for false assumptions is David, the difference maker. So David is a difference maker. He's an amazing salesperson that, closes deals and makes the difference and all that kind of thing. But his assumption is that he always has to do it, like no one else can do it. And it's, in part, it's been fed by this unbelievable standout strength. The challenge is that it makes it impossible for him to scale, impossible for him to do the work he needs to do, impossible for him to develop his team. So he's running a false assumption. The false assumption is, I got to do this because I'm the only one. I'm the difference maker. I'm the only one that can make a difference, as opposed to building difference makers. So there's an example of false assumptions.
Number 2.
Number 2 is unhealthy detachment. And you could also kind of think about healthy, unhealthy attachment and unhealthy detachment. This is just this idea of sometimes we're really attached to something or we're really detached from something. That's not important. That's not so unhealthy detachment. Just to stick to this example, because I saw that it was the most common, is say something's very important to your team. There's just something sacred. There's something sacred in the culture. There's something sacred. There's something very, very motivating to your team. And you don't think it really makes sense. Like you don't really care about it. You don't listen to it. You don't spend time. So you have an unhealthy detachment to something that's very, very important. And so unhealthy detachment is when we just decide to sort of stay detached from something that's actually quite critical to our environment.
Or one of the things I think of when I think about this one is I think about how, especially as a frontline leader, we feel like we can't be friends with people anymore. So like we detach to a degree.
Oh, it's another
unhealthy.
great example.
It's another example, I think, of that particular one.
Another example. Absolutely.
The third one.
Differing views of success. So this happens because we all kind of have our view of what success looks like in a role or success looks like in a project. And sometimes we don't sit down and sort of figure out what other people think success is. And we start running these parallel tracks of where we're headed. So it's really important that we sync up, right? We all have our reticular activating system, our part of our brain that's telling every day, figuring out where we're headed. And if it's all different, it ends up creating a lot of blind spots.
Number 4.
Outdated core beliefs. Yeah. So this is, I think we have to think about our brain as software. It's software that's been programmed with experiences and beliefs and thoughts and, over our lives. And some of those things get outdated. Some of the software needs sort of upgrading and debugging. So an outdated core belief, it could be, I'll talk about Xavier the Extra Miler. So Xavier the Extra Miler had incredible work ethic. But literally, and sort of from his youth, he was just sort of his whole life was about like delivering the extra mile, even if it kills him. And that was a core belief. Like I can work hard, I can work unrelentlessly. I don't need to sleep. I don't need to eat. I don't need to any of these things. And it was starting to seriously sneak up on him to the point where his organization was very, very worried about his health. His family was worried about his health. So he needed a new belief. He needed a new belief, which was, I can be extremely effective. I can deliver outstanding results, but I have to do it in new ways.
Yep.
Yeah.
The next one, and I think this next one, I think is probably the one that people probably will immediately say, okay, I get this one.
Yeah.
Almost without you saying anything, but I do want you to say a little bit more about unconscious habits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are the more classical types of blind spots where we just do something that we're not conscious of. It's just in our behaviors, in our, sometimes it can be something like using the word I all the time. It's an unconscious habit. People will, it will annoy people because they feel like they're being excluded and you're taking all the credit and all this kind of stuff. But I've met a lot of people who that's not their intention. They just have a vocabulary habit. They can be very team oriented and very proud of their team, but they have a vocabulary habit that really creates a negative impact on other people. So that's an example where there's an unconscious habit that they need to form a new habit around because it's causing problems for them.
Number 6.
Triggers from past pain. So this is just, we have an alarm system in our mind that doesn't want bad things to happen again. So it's always, and we have a very, very strong pattern recognition engine. So what happens is we're in a situation, we're in a meeting, we're in a project, we're in a sales pursuit, and something feels, the brain goes, oh, ding, 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 ding.
Yep.
This is happening again. History is repeating itself. And so it believes that the past pain is recreating itself. And that creates a whole bunch of behaviors. And so it takes in leadership, I think it takes a lot of discipline to realize, to understand your past pain and understand that you're going to remember your past pain. Like, you can't forget it. Your brain is wired to remember it. But you have to realize when that is what's driving your thinking habit, that's what's happening. And because what that does is it just clouds your thinking. You just can't see what's actually going on in the present moment. You're clouded by that. So triggers from past pain is just your behavior is being it's kind of, you're on autopilot because of some past experience.
And if we become aware of that, like it's the idea of if you know that someone pushes your button, or if that button you can tell when that button is being pushed, then you can get beside it and manage it. But if you never noticed it, then you're absolutely being triggered by a past pain.
Absolutely.
And then you're going down, and we all know what that looks like.
Absolutely. And it's very confusing to your teams because you sound like you have all this information that doesn't even exist.
Who is this crazy person in front of the room, right?
Yeah.
And the last of the 7.
Yeah, mismatched mindset. So this is a little bit of like understanding that your mindsets in leadership really evolve over time. And sometimes what happens is, I define leadership in some ways, break it down between leading self, leading others, and leading change. And there's different mindsets associated with that. And sometimes what happens is we get sort of stuck in one of them. So we all have to master leading self. And it's not that it becomes unimportant. It's always important. But when we're in a leading self energy, we're not always as attentive to the leading others aspects. What does the team need from us? Rather than what do I need to do my best work? What does the team need to do my best work? And then even like leading change, maybe it's actually maybe we're out of our comfort zone. We're not maybe it's actually also like the ways we have to show up is going to be different. And so mismatched mindset is when a leader's kind of stuck in a leadership mindset, and it's incongruent with the role that they need to play in that moment or the circumstances that they're trying to deal with. So trying to be very cognizant. And one of the things that I think is very important that makes it a bit more tangible is to think about the underlying values for each of these mindsets. We all have these beautiful values in terms of leadership, but which ones are most important in different mindsets is a way to kind of attune a little bit to that.
So the unfair question, and maybe even not perfectly helpful, but I'm going to ask it anyway, is there 7 of them? And in all of the leaders that you work with, is there one that you think, generally speaking, ends up being the biggest problem, biggest source, or perhaps the most damaging source?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's only one example in the book that isn't sort of a hero's journey, which is where a leader actually ended up being let go or replaced. And that was in unhealthy detachments. And in that case, it was, again, I think unhealthy detachments can be kind of a scary one because you're repeatedly discounting something that's important to other people. So you're not even factoring it in, you're not allowing, it's almost like, you could almost describe it as you're not allowing very important co-creators to influence you, like people that are just critical to your capability to succeed. And you think you're letting them in, like you think you've heard what they said. That's the detachment piece. Like you think you've heard it, but you don't think it matters. And so if you don't think it matters, you're almost like this rationally irrational version of yourself because you're like, I've heard it all or whatever. And so I think that one's a little bit more dangerous, I would say. And it's again, you're trying to get to that healthy, like there's a reason why it's unhealthy and healthy. It doesn't mean you have to like totally 100% buy in, but you have to have a healthy enough interest to understand how to factor that in. And
I think be aware of the interests of others, recognizing
Absolutely.
that they're not necessarily the same as your own.
Yeah.
Which I think is a critical piece of this as well.
Yeah, you talk about we've mentioned self-awareness, and I oscillate a little bit in the book between talking about self-awareness and others' awareness. I feel like self-awareness is an insufficient term for leadership. I think we mean, when we say self-awareness, I think we mean awareness of everything, but I almost have to overemphasize others' awareness, because I find like when I say, if you turn on your others' awareness, what was going on in the room, all of a sudden they will start getting data points from, the mothership of information that they didn't have access to when I would say, what did you feel you're self-aware about? Did you see there's something powerful about those?
Because there's the difference of what's going on here versus what's going on out there, for sure.
Absolutely.
That's for sure. So I promised at the open that we wouldn't just talk about what they are. Like, this is an ironic conversation, everybody. We're talking about seeing the things that we can't see, right? and so we have to figure out how we get there.
Mm-hmm.
And what we were just talking about, is creating a bit of others awareness, having an other focus may help us see some things from a different perspective. Putting ourselves in a different perspective may help us. And yet we still have these blind spots. It's a one-word answer, but like, how do we become unblinded? How do we become aware? How do we get that first step so we can start to move past these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing to know is that the information absolutely exists. The challenge is that it is in other people's heads. So you can sort of reflect on a meeting and get some theories on what might have been going on with other people. And those theories are worthy hypotheses, but they're not the end game. The data is in other people's heads. And that's why, feedback is so important. So many leaders say that it's not easy to get feedback. It's not easy to get, that's true. But I also think that it's not easy to hear feedback. It's not easy to take in feedback. So, we have that same problem of the blind leading the blind. We need feedback, but we don't really like it and we don't really want it and we want to reject it. So, a lot of this is in that notion. I typically try to refer to things as impact statements. I try to get impact statements more than I try to get feedback. This feedback.
So tell everybody what you mean by an impact statement.
Yeah. So feedback implies that it's like the right answer, like that somehow I'm going to tell you back what you maybe should have done. Impact statements is just simply like, when you said this, I felt this. It's just very first person. It's your classic like first person. So impact statement, the questions can be very similar, but you could, I find that the hearing of it is easier when you're thinking about it as an impact statement, because it's more depersonalized. It's about you, but it's about them, right? Because our behavior goes through someone else's brain, which have all these blind spots too, right? So,
right.
So what I might say might trigger past pain for them, which will create a different response. But is it important for me to understand, like, when you said that, it reminded me of that deal we lost together 5 years ago, and I feel like you're still judging me. I feel still judged, would be a better way to say it, right? By that experience. And then I get the opportunity to say, oh, that's so insightful. And yet that wasn't what was on my mind at all. And we get to kind of come closer together, and we can sort of say, my intention was not, and I wasn't even there, but I totally understand that impact on you. And really when I narrow the gap, so if this is intention and this is impact, and the blind spots create this wedge, we're narrowing the gap through those conversations. We're trying to get the intention and the impact aligned.
So what you just described, Marisa, is hard, right? And then for people, in many cases, to talk about or to share, or even to just put words around. We make it more challenging when we're the leader asking our team member to give feedback to us as the boss. Right. So like, we don't have time to go into this deeply, but do you have any specific thoughts about how to encourage people to share their feedback, impact statements, whatever language you want to use there, because there's a barrier because we're the boss.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's just habit and practice. It's really, so there's, it gets familiar and it gets possible, but it doesn't the very first time you try. And if you try and then you're like, I got nothing, and then you're like,
You have to keep asking. That was part of what I wanted you to get to.
Yeah.
This is important for us as leaders to get this information, to get this perspective, and to say, well, I asked, I didn't get it. You have to keep going after it. You have to ask in different ways. You have to ask in different situations. You have to ask when maybe they won't perceive the pressure as being as high. Like, you have to keep going after it. If you don't, you probably won't get it.
Yeah. And I think you have to be like honestly curious, and you have to be really transparent of the fact that you are an imperfect human always trying to get better. Like, I love it when I can sit with a leadership team and we can all just be like, I am an imperfect human. Like, let's all try and make each other better. Like, it's, it's a little kindergarten, but it's really, really important, right? Because I think there's so much energy in a room sometimes with people that want to make a difference, but are getting entangled in all kinds of suboptimal behaviors. And so we can just sort of say, okay, so I think part of it is just that humility around being like, we're all imperfect, that drive to get better, that just even it's 1% better or half a point better, like even if it's just half a point better at being able to receive the feedback without defending yourself, which is trying to understand it and trying to see it from that person's perspective and trying to find it really fascinating. Like, I try to tell people, like, people will be like, wow, that's really upsetting. I'm like, no, it's fascinating. Isn't it? Isn't it fascinating? It's fascinating how many ways other people can interpret your behavior, and not in a paralyzing way, but in a fascinating kind of puzzle kind of way. And I also have to remind people that in the book, there's 21 client stories of sort of transformation. In every single instant, the thing they had to change was minuscule, tiny, 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 the tiniest little tweaks. Like, people at some point, I think they'll receive a 360 and they'll be like, I'll just speak for me. I remember one time I received a 360 and I thought I needed a lobotomy to rejig this thing, because there was all kinds of stuff that I was like, I don't even know how to be, right? So, but it's not that. It's very, very small intentional moments that make the biggest difference.
Little hinges, everybody, swing big doors.
Absolutely.
So, Marisa, I am going to shift the gears. We're going to start to wrap this up, and I've got a couple of other questions for you, 3 more to be specific. The first one is, what do you do for fun?
Oh, so much, but mostly I try to spend as much time with my boys, who are getting big and don't want to play with me as much as before. So they're 19 and 16.
Yeah, you're not cool anymore.
So I try to do everything I can to play, whether it's that shooting hoops or skiing or chatting, or if they wake me up in the middle of the night, like, I do not care. I'm a little puppy dog for time with my boys. I made these 2 babies. I've loved every minute of them. And I didn't get the memo that they go and have their own lives.
Yeah, you need to get that memo. There's your blind spot, Marisa. We have identified your blind spot in this conversation.
Yeah,
I have been
everything
there.
that they have fun with.
That, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Okay, yeah. So trust me, it'll change again. It's changed. It'll change again. I promise you.
Yeah.
So I've just read your book, clearly. Tell us what you're reading these days.
Yeah. So I'm reading right now. I'm digging through senior leadership teams, what it takes to make them great. I like this book a lot because it's building blocks of teams and frameworks. And I'm reading it again. And I'm also reading your book. I told you, The Long Distance Team. And I just reread The 5 Dysfunctions of the Team. So you'll notice a theme. I'm reading a lot about teams right now because I do feel that we're rebuilding teams. I believe that 2024 is going to, a lot of our work is going to be rebuilding teams, as if the pandemic hasn't, really been okay for a while. We're still figuring out, I think, the composition of the new culture and the dynamics of change that continue and perpetually challenge these teams. So I'm going back to some of these fundamental principles. And I love the things that you bring in your book to this as well, Kevin. So I'm really enjoying that.
All right. So we'll have all those in the show notes for you, as we do every week, as well as, of course, Marisa's book, Blind Spots. But where can people reach out to you? Where can they learn more information? Where do you want to point people before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. So leaderly.com is my website. And so that you can reach out to me directly there. And in terms of social media, I am on all platforms, but I hang out the most on LinkedIn. So please connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you're thinking about. And all things leadership, I'm fascinated and love to talk about.
That's Leaderly, Leaderley.com, everybody.
Absolutely.
Leaderly.com. And so now, everybody, before we go to the question I ask you every single episode, it's the question of application. Now what? What are you going to do with what you just got? Maybe what you've gotten is an insight into maybe where you think your blind spots might be. Maybe one of the examples that Marisa shared with you gives you insight into something that you need to go, like she helped you see one of yours already, in which case now you can go take action. What action would that be? Or maybe the action you need to take is to work on getting some feedback from your teams, being patient and persistent and curious and humble and asking for feedback from your team on a specific situation or in general to help you become more effective, whatever that might be. Those are just a couple of things that I wrote down. Maybe you need to remind yourself every day, I am an imperfect human. I don't know what the thing is for you, but what I know is if you don't take any action from this time, it will have had limited impact for you. And so it has been our intention that this would become impactful for you, and it will mostly do that if you take action. Marisa, thank you for being here. Such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
And if you enjoyed this, invite someone to come watch or listen to this, but come back next week, because next week on the podcast, I'll be here again. I've been here for 400 and some weeks, not stopping now. We'll see you next week on the next episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.